My mom called me her biggest mistake at my 21st birthday gathering. So I stood up for myself and exposed her in front of everyone. I grew up knowing I was different in my own home, even before I had the words to explain it. My name is Alex, and for as long as I can remember, my mom, Linda, treated me like an obligation rather than a child she actually wanted. It wasn't something she ever admitted outright when I was younger, but kids can feel what adults try to hide. Every sigh, every disappointed look, every time she praised my younger brother, Jason, while barely acknowledging I was in the room. Jason was everything to her. Her pride, her proof that she was a good mother. If he brought home an average grade, she framed it like an achievement. If I brought home something better, she found a flaw. You could have done more. Don't get comfortable. Jason tries harder than you. The comparisons never stopped, and somehow, I was always the one coming up short. At first, I thought this was normal. I told myself she was just strict, just tough, just raised that way. I watched other families and wondered why their parents laughed with them, hugged them for no reason, asked about their feelings. In my house, love felt conditional. You earned it by not being inconvenient. My dad noticed. He tried to balance things out, but he worked long hours and avoided conflict. Whenever I hinted at how Linda made me feel, he'd say, "That's just how your mom is." Like that explained everything. Jason didn't notice at all, or maybe he did and just enjoyed the benefits too much to question them. By the time I turned 20, I stopped expecting anything from my mom. Birthdays were just reminders of how invisible I was. A card with my name misspelled. A forced hug. No warmth. Still, when my dad told me he wanted to host a small family dinner for my 21st birthday, a small, stupid part of me hoped maybe this year would be different. I should have known better. The dinner was simple. Just close family, a few relatives, and some of Jason's friends who were basically always around anyway. The table was full, the food smelled good, and for a moment, it almost felt normal. People laughed. Glasses clinked. My dad made sure to sit beside me, like he sensed I might need backup. Linda barely looked at me. She fussed over Jason nonstop. Asked him about school, about his plans, about his future. When someone tried to include me in the conversation, she redirected it effortlessly back to him. I smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, and kept my expectations low. I was used to this rhythm. Then came the cake. My dad brought it out with candles shaped like the number 21. Everyone sang. I closed my eyes, made a wish I already knew wouldn't come true, and blew them out. People clapped, and for a brief second, all eyes were on me. That's when Linda decided to speak. She lifted her glass and smiled in a way that immediately made my stomach tighten. "I guess it's time to say something," she said. The room quieted, expecting a toast. She looked directly at me and said, "You know, sometimes I think you were my biggest mistake." The words hit harder than anything she'd ever said before. The room froze. Forks stopped midair. My grandmother gasped loudly. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it had to be a joke. Jason let out an awkward chuckle, clearly unsure how to react. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My ears rang as every insult, every dismissal, every moment of neglect rushed back all at once. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't backtrack. She just sat there, like she'd said something completely reasonable. That was when something inside me finally broke. I could have stayed quiet. That's what I'd always done. Let it slide. Pretend it didn't hurt. Tell myself I was overreacting. But as I looked around that table and saw the shock on everyone's faces, I realized something important. They were finally seeing it. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking just enough that I had to grip the back of my chair to steady myself. Linda looked annoyed, like I was about to embarrass her, not the other way around. "Funny you say that," I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "Because every mistake you've made has been about choosing appearances over love. And tonight, everyone here finally sees it." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. My aunt leaned toward my uncle, whispering urgently. My grandmother's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. My dad stared at Linda, fury written all over him. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she didn't have a comeback. I wasn't done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My heart pounded, because I hadn't planned this. I'd kept the recording for months, telling myself I'd never actually use it. But after what she'd just said, I knew I couldn't keep protecting her. "I want you all to hear something," I said. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, sharp, angry, unmistakable, yelling at me, calling me useless, saying I'd never amount to anything. Then, in the same breath, praising Jason for doing the bare minimum. "This," I said quietly as the audio ended, "is what I've lived with. This is the woman who just called me her biggest mistake." No one spoke. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Linda's face drained of color. She looked around the table, realizing she no longer controlled the narrative. Her image, The loving, proud mother was cracking in real time. My grandmother stood up first. She walked around the table and pulled me into a tight hug, her voice shaking as she whispered, "You are not a mistake. You are the best thing that ever happened to this family." I felt something in me collapse, years of held-in pain finally releasing. My dad stood next. "That was cruel," he said to Linda, his voice low and dangerous. "If you can't respect our child, you can leave this table." Jason stared at his plate, stunned. The golden child mask was slipping, and for the first time, he looked uncomfortable with the spotlight. I didn't hate him for it. He hadn't asked for this. But he couldn't pretend anymore either. Linda tried to laugh it off. "You're all being dramatic," she said weakly. "It was just a joke." No one laughed. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked out of the room without another word. No apology. No explanation. Just humiliation trailing behind her. The tension slowly eased, replaced by something I wasn't used to: support. People checked on me, told me they were proud of me, told me they'd noticed things before but hadn't known how bad it was. I sat back down, emotionally exhausted but lighter than I'd ever felt. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. The rest of the night felt surreal. We ate cake. We talked. We laughed. Real laughter, not the forced kind. Linda didn't come back. No one went after her. Jason eventually looked at me and said quietly, "I didn't know it was that bad." I nodded. That was enough. Awareness was a start. Later, my dad sat beside me and said, "I should have done more." I told him we could talk about it later. Tonight wasn't about fixing everything. It was about reclaiming something I'd lost. As I looked around the room, I realized something powerful. Linda's cruelty had thrived in silence. The moment it was exposed, it lost its grip. I wasn't weak for surviving it. I was strong for confronting it. When it was time to blow out the candles again, because my aunt insisted I deserved a redo, I smiled for real. Not because everything was perfect, but because the truth was finally out. That night changed everything. Linda tried to ruin my birthday, but instead, she gave me the moment I didn't know I needed. The chance to stand up for myself. The chance to be believed. The chance to stop carrying her shame as if it were mine. I learned something important at 21. You don't owe silence to people who hurt you. You don't owe loyalty to cruelty. And you are never a mistake for existing. Linda didn't leave smiling. She left exposed. And I blew out my candles knowing, for the first time in my life, that I was enough exactly as I am.